Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Gaming News, where we discuss various topics within the gaming industry. Most of the time, that revolves around the video gaming industry. However, today we are also going to talk about the tabletop gaming industry as well as the final topic for today's episode. So, first, we are going to talk about information having to deal with Cyberpunk 2077 that just released. We are going to talk a little bit about Activision Blizzard and some of the developments going on with that whole situation. We are going to talk about Bungie and about Destiny 2 and some of the things that they are doing here because I feel as a Destiny 2 player that I should comment on this. And then finally, we are going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons and Wizards of the Coast and give you guys some information that maybe you didn't know about previously. So, with all of that said, let's get started on our first topic. The first thing I would like to cover today, of course, is Cyberpunk and CD Projekt Red. Now, earlier today, there was a tweet that laid out a bit of a game plan for the future of Cyberpunk, and right now, the expansion that we've all been anxiously waiting for among delays and bug fixes and other situations having to deal with the title, we finally have information with when potentially that DLC will come out. Unfortunately, it isn't until next year that we will receive the expansion that we have been waiting for. Now, of course, CD Projekt Red is committed to the Cyberpunk franchise, as the president announced during an earnings call that the development of the expansion has been worked on, and they are hoping to bring excellent content to the game because, of course, they want it to be a living, breathing, evolving kind of world, and that the expansion is being developed by multiple agile teams, which were implemented as a part of the transformation process that began after the disastrous development. Now, he didn't elaborate on what we were going to receive with that, but they, of course, are going to work on it, and we will get it sometime in 2023. And Powell did release a tweet that stated that it would be ready when it is ready, and hopefully that is true and that it isn't going to be a train wreck like the launch of the game. So hopefully this will be good because, of course, we know that while people may say one thing, especially when it comes to CDPR, who obviously went back on the promises of we were not going to invoke crunch time and release a game that was unfinished. And then, unfortunately, even though they paid a lot of lip service to the fans, they did it anyways, and they had to deal with the consequences of their actions. So, with that, many of the other news sites have talked about this, and that the game is now in a much better state and is worthwhile to play. Although, again, we still have to see what will happen and if the DLC and expansion is really going to do anything, especially since we have more information coming from CD Projekt Red, which is that the Witcher 3 Next Generation update is in-house and it is being delayed indefinitely. The PlayStation 5, the Xbox Series X and S update for The Witcher 3 is on hold until further notice. And although they have seen a number of delays because of the situation, they officially announced on the 13th that the game, the next gen version, will be handled by an in-house development team. and that they would update us as soon as they can. Also, the important thing to know here is CD Projekt Red announced last month that it is currently working on a new Witcher game, one powered by Epic's Unreal 5 engine, as opposed to the studio's in-house tech. And game director Jason Slama vowed there would be no crunch. His exact words were, "Never on my watch." Now, this is interesting to me because it does say that they have moved away from the Red engine, but we have seen, and it was reported back in March, that they were switching to Unreal for the next Witcher game, and that they were moving away from Red engine. So I'm very curious to see what ultimately happens here, whether or not the game will fix maybe a lot of the bugs that they had, even though they have done a lot of things to improve gameplay for Cyberpunk. I am really curious to see what ends up happening as a result of the move away from Red Engine and into Unreal. But I'm very curious to hear what any of you think about Cyberpunk and about Witcher 3 and what this means for CD Projekt Red moving forward, maybe what you're excited to have added to the game, or if you were really excited about the Witcher next gen updates. I just want to know where you're sitting in terms of this topic. Next up, we are going to talk about Activision. Now, of course, it wouldn't be gaming news if we didn't cover Activision Blizzard. And today we have some more information about the lawsuit. So previously, there were two separate lawsuits that were happening with respect to Activision Blizzard. There was the EEOC lawsuit, and then there was the DFEH lawsuit, and they had similar fact patterns, and they were both being held in court at relatively the same time, and there was a whole bunch of issues relating to both of the lawsuits and to see what was going to happen. Now, a couple weeks back, we talked about how the EEOC finally came to a settlement with the courts, and they were issued a payout. Now, that, of course, means that the DFEH has to still deal with their lawsuit, and there is news about that specifically. So, what I mean is, Polygon released an article on the 13th saying the fate of Activision Blizzard lawsuit is unclear as California lawyer accuses the governor of interference. Now, I don't know about you, but that is already an incredibly bad step. If you have political parties stepping into lawsuits, then it opens up a whole new can of worms, and the court is meant to level the playing field in a lot of situations. At least that's the way it's meant to be. And it feels like this is really, really bad news in this particular instance, but I digress. So, this is talking about the DFEH, and the article begins with a lawyer with California's Department of Fair Housing and Employment has resigned after accusing Governor Gavin Newsom of interfering with the state's Activision Blizzard lawsuit, according to a Bloomberg report. So the lawyer, Melanie Proctor, worked as an assistant chief counsel for the DFEH and told staff Tuesday night she was resigning after her boss, chief counsel Janet Whipper, was fired by the governor. That is immediately a bad sign if you're fired from one of the biggest lawsuits in terms of video gaming. And in terms of your portfolio, that is not a good place to be. But Anyways, a representative for the lawyers confirmed that Proctor resigned and that Whipper was fired. So, with the top two lawyers of the Activision Blizzard case, the fate of the lawsuit becomes unclear. I would also like to take a half second here to mention that both of these lawyers are women. And considering that all of the allegations revolve entirely around sexual allegations, harassment, unfair, unequal pay, all of that, and how women, persons of colors, gender identities are being discriminated against at all levels of Activision Blizzard from things that we have read. It really is concerning to me that two women who are clearly incredibly good at their job have either left or been fired from their job in one of the biggest cases by a company that is known to effectively abuse its people at all stages. So I just thought I'd throw that out there. Anyways, Bloomberg reports that Proctor told staff that Newsom began to interfere with the Activision Blizzard lawsuit and that his interference began mimicking the interests of Activision's counsel. Whipper was fired after attempting to protect the DFEH's investigation. A spokesperson for Whipper told Bloomberg she's evaluating all avenues of legal recourse, including a claim under the California Whistleblower Protection Act. I don't know what that act is. I am not a lawyer. I am not in the United States, but I am very curious to know exactly what types of recourse you could claim under that act. Like, I would love to see the actual law for what all this covers and how that will be useful in this particular case. Because if you're already looking at that as one of your legal recourses, that means you probably have some evidence to support your claim. And it's at this point that I'm now wondering who or what would get you that kind of evidence to look at this specific act. So, those of you who are in the US, if you could potentially in Discord link me the act that I could look at, I would be very interested to see how this relates, and maybe that explains in part why Whipper was fired from the team, because again, this is not looking very good overall. Now, of course, a couple of other news media sites picked this up, and I looked at The Verge, and a lot of the article has very similar information to the Polygon article, but there was a paragraph in here I wanted to address, and that is, while the DFEH's attempts to block the settlement didn't seem to be motivated by the settlement's size or relative lack thereof, it did seem to want to pursue harsher penalties than the EEOC proposed. Now, with the DFEH's top two lawyers gone, allegedly at the behest of the California governor, it seems like political forces who could have a vested interest in Activision's board or even Microsoft's have decided Activision Blizzard has properly atoned. In an email to The Verge, DFEH Deputy Communication Director Fahiza Alim said DFEH does not comment on personnel matters. The DFEH will continue to vigorously enforce California's civil rights and fair housing laws. And I wanted to bring attention to that because even in this article, it's talking about how if there was some kind of political forces that have an interest in the board, either at Activision or now at Microsoft, that could feel like you are trying to manipulate a situation to look good for you. Who knows? The fact that this is even a possibility is kind of disturbing, and I am very curious to see where the DFEH's lawsuit goes from here. But thankfully, there is at least a tiny bit of good news with Activision, and there's also not good news at the same time. What I mean is Game Industry Biz released this article on the 7th, so it's a little bit further back, but I wanted to mention it because it obviously relates to the Activision Blizzard situation in an adjacent way, which is that Activision Blizzard is turning all of its temporary and contingent QA workers in the US to full-time employees with full benefits. The move affects nearly 1,100 people, and the publisher is also raising the minimum hourly pay for those positions to $20 an hour as of April 17th. Now, they're converting the part time staff to full time employees, and that is a demand that was made by Raven Software's QA team back in December, and they had started a strike, which ended with a vote in favor of unionization. One of the other demands that they had made was that Activision hire back the QA contractors whose layoffs had prompted the strike and offer them full time positions. Now, thankfully, Game Industry Biz took a bit more of a look into the situation and found that those laid off contractors would also be hired back. And an Activision Blizzard representative said this conversion of nearly 1,100 QA workers at Activision and Blizzard does not have any relation to the petition pending at Raven Studio. The Raven situation is limited to Raven. The testers whose contracts were extended were welcome then and now to apply for any job at the company. Additionally, an Activision Blizzard representative told Bloomberg that the new minimum pay would not apply to Raven QA workers who voted for unionizations due to legal obligations under the National Labor Relations Act. Now, this bothers the crap out of me for so many reasons, because obviously there were a lot of people at Raven Studios who lost their jobs because of the situation developing at the studio and how they were treated, etc. And the fact that Activision Blizzard once again is looking at, we're going to make it look good for Microsoft and do all of these good things and do right by our employees by instating an increase of wages and bringing QA on as full-time workers, meaning ideally that they would get benefits, etc. And you have specifically stated that the Raven employees don't get any of this, and they especially state that this does not apply to workers who voted in favor of unionization. Now, given the fact that they stopped their strike because they voted in favor of unionization, it gives the idea that this was something that they actually wanted. And here we are, Activision Blizzard showing their true colors that they do not want workers to unionize. They don't want people to protect themselves, once again screwing over their staff. So there is only a silver lining that is incredibly thin here, but I feel really bad for the people at Raven Studios who have to put up with their crap. And hopefully they get out of this situation, or they continue to fight for fair pay and equal treatment and actually have a good work environment, as opposed to what they're clearly not like getting right now. So I'm very curious to see what happens moving forward, but I still don't feel like Activision is doing the right things, and I hope that Microsoft steps in and changes a lot of things and makes things better, because right now it's still not good. And I maintain that idea. But I'm curious to see what you guys think about the situation. Let me know if you agree or disagree and why. I have Discord channels specifically for that, so chime in. Let's have a conversation about this whole Activision Blizzard debacle. I have plenty of videos about this particular topic, so feel free to go back and take a look if you don't know the full scope of what is happening here. Next, I would like to talk about Bungie, and there are two sort of separate things that are happening here, and I don't want to spend too much time on it. And that is Game Industry Biz released an article on the 13th saying that Bungie goes digital first, offers remote roles in the US. So they have started to roll out a fully remote positions in selected US states as part of a pivot to digital working. So, CEO Pete Parsons said, over the past 2 years, we have redefined how we work at Bungie. The transition to work from home wasn't easy, but the results speak for themselves. Today, it's clear that a digital first workplace isn't the future of work, it's already here, and we are all in. And I'm kind of excited about this, but, anyways. Bungie has kept us in the loop throughout the process, says Leanna Rupert, who is the community manager of Bungie right now for Destiny 2. And in this tweet, she continued by saying, while there is the option to go into the office with proof of vaccination and a health screening is required and provided, largely there has not been pressure to do so. And I feel like this is really where we're at when it comes to workspaces. There are a lot of people who want to continue working from home, who like that freedom, or who don't want to go into the office nearly as often for fear of the COVID pandemic or the uselessness of meeting after meeting or whatever it happens to be. People can feel more efficient and better in some cases by working at home, where other people feel it's easier for them to work in an office environment. And giving people the option to work from home and still work for Bungie is actually a really cool idea. Now, if they could expand to Canada so some of us can apply to these positions, that would be great. But moving right along. The second thing I wanted to talk about with respect to Bungie is again related to Destiny 2, and I want to address the PvP discussion that has been happening on Twitter and throughout the community lately. Now, this is as a result of the community manager DMG posting a lengthy tweet which stated, hey, just to keep the record straight, we literally turned off skill-based matchmaking in the majority of Crucible playlists multiple years ago. This was thanks to feedback from high-skilled players. We now have more negative sentiment around matchmaking than ever before. This is not only coming from players in high skill bands, but many in low skill bands who are frequently matched against players way out of their punching weight. New players are thrown into the fray with little to no experience with the game or its systems. And yeah, I 100% agree that the PvP playlist situation is not fun for anyone. I have had multiple friends leave the game because of the PvP, and not just the fact that there's PvP in the game, but the fact that there are many instances where the game forces you into PvP playlists. There are quests that require guardian kills. And with a lot of the gambit changes, it makes it harder to do some of those because now it is more reliable to get those kills in the Crucible playlist. So people have legitimately going into Crucible playlists to get their pinnacle gear, and then they leave immediately. Now, this was met with a huge amount of contention online in the community about people complaining that connection-based matchmaking, which is supposedly what we have currently, is not helping and is still making the experience difficult for a lot of the community, which makes up about 90% of the community, that are not as skilled. You end up going into matches where there's one or two people who have a 5.0 KD and everybody else doesn't even make a 1 KD. And this is not a good place to be. And a lot of us have been railing back saying we want skill-based matchmaking to be a thing again, because at least then I can go up against opponents that are relative to my skill. And this shouldn't be too difficult considering that you have the tracker network, you have the Bungie's own website, you have the various apps that will show you all of your statistics, what your average KD is, how many matches you've had, how many kills you've made in the game. It should not be difficult to take a look at someone's average KD over a course of time and say, we are not going to put you against the top level players. And also in this tweet, he essentially admitted to the fact that they listened to the top 1% of players who are the god tiers at PvP saying we want this to be a thing instead of that a thing so that they can have an easy time. And again, I'm going to state Destiny is not a competitive esport. It should not matter whether or not you want an easier or harder time in Crucible when there is quite literally no money on the line. You want rewards, you want something fun, you want something challenging, allow that to happen. So Paul Tassi continues to talk about this, and he said that the situation really boils down to two things. One, players are blaming these unbalanced games on skill-based matchmaking, but that hasn't been a thing for a long time. And two, Bungie seems to be indicating that the fix for this is skill-based matchmaking, because otherwise you have situations like brand new players being thrown into games like this and getting stomped because connection-based matchmaking is being used instead. And interestingly enough, while you may think you've got connection-based matchmaking, there's so many times where I go into matches where I'm against people that have various characters. And it makes me think that some of these people might be in Europe or in Asia or something, which is not necessarily a problem, except when it comes to the ping. If that balances out, I understand why connection-based matchmaking would be useful to make sure that you're not dealing with ridiculous amounts of ping, but by completely skipping over the balancing when it comes to what skill-based matchmaking is supposed to be used for, it still makes it harder for people. Anyways, Paul Tassi finally says, I think players need to give whatever major changes Bungie makes a chance and not go in predisposed to blast skill-based matchmaking when clearly the current system without it is not working well at all. And basically saying that Bungie needs to find its footing when it comes to the matchmaking system in their own game. It's not easy to balance a game that has a very big PvE component as well as a very big PvP component. And while you want people to be more confident about going into your high ends like your Trials and your Iron Banner playlists. You're not helping the community by not having some way to level the playing field where most people go into Crucible and hate their lives, and that is 90% of the Destiny 2 community. So I hope that whatever solution they come up with, that people don't immediately bash it and try to crush it before you can really get statistics on whether or not it's working, but allow Bungie to make those changes and to experiment and see what actually works well for the game instead of going on this tirade on Twitter ranting about how you hate this because it's no longer easy for you to get your kills and your wins. So that's really what I wanted to say about this. But again, I pass the question to you. And do you think that skill based matchmaking should be let back into Destiny 2? And keep in mind that if you start flaming the idea and don't have civil discussion about it, I will delete those messages, just FYI. Finally, we are going to talk very briefly about Dungeons and Dragons because I don't want to go on a mass tirade about this, even though I could. Now, on the 13th, The Verge released an article that states Dungeons and Dragons is now going to be paired up with D&D Beyond. Now, if you don't know, D&D Beyond was actually not created by HASBRO or Wizards of the Coast or anything like that. D&D Beyond was created by a whole different group of people, and it allows you to create your characters. They've put in all kinds of rule books for Dungeons and Dragons in there so that you can create your character, find all of the information you need about your character. You could save multiple characters if you're in multiple campaigns, and it has been a very useful tool for a lot of people that play Dungeons and Dragons. Now, in this situation, HASBRO is acquiring D&D Beyond. And the publisher Wizards of the Coast is actually purchasing it for $146.3 million. The popular tabletop role-playing game has licensed D&D Beyond as its official subscription-based digital toolset since 2017. Now, you may have assumed that it was produced and owned by D&D owners all along, but it was operated by Fandom, the hosting service for nerdy wikis like Wikipedia and this one for Elden Ring. This deal shifts D&D Beyond from a royalty-based revenue source for Wizards of the Coast to in-house development, and with that, it brings along its nearly 10 million registered users who range from a free tier to a $5.99 per month subscription, as well as their precious data. And I just want to make note here that the part of the reason why I wanted to talk about this is because people who are new to Dungeons and Dragons and new to the idea of Wizards of the Coast being the top dogs when it comes to Dungeons and Dragons in general may not know about some of the issues that have come up because of Wizards of the Coast. And they may look at this deal like it's fantastic that Wizards of the Coast will now have D&D Beyond and that it will make things better and easier and whatnot, and that's not necessarily the case. And while I am, I guess, glad that there will be a lot more people who can access D&D Beyond because there is that revenue source that they had before, this may be another way that Wizards tries to keep a hold on their content. And what I mean by that is In 2020, Tor.com released an article talking about a freelancer quits due to hostile work environment. And in this article, game designer Orion D. Black left their job at Wizards of the Coast Dungeons & Dragons department, calling out the company for paying lip service towards diversity and change while exploding BIPOC, especially Black freelancers, and silencing and ignoring criticism of systemic problems. And unfortunately, even though this was back in 2020, Wizards of the Coast has done a lot of anti-consumer things that are behind closed doors that maybe people aren't as familiar with. So while they have not treated their creators properly, there's other people who are angry with Wizards of the Coast because of their actions. In 2021, there was an article that says TSR is back and looking to sue Wizards of the Coast for reasons. And if you looked through this article, one of the statements that I've highlighted here is if you're unfamiliar with a strange tale of 3 TSRs from earlier this year, you may want to brush up. It's an absolutely dizzying affair of copyright claims, company separations, and 3 whirlwind weeks that saw contributors distance themselves from the contentious allegations, resulting in TSR getting banned from a series of conventions. Wizards of the Coast, while they have created such a mass fandom when it comes to tabletop gaming, a lot of people may look at the recent announcement of Wizards of the Coast acquiring D&D Beyond as not a good thing. And that doesn't even touch the surface of some of the other things that Wizards of the Coast have been accused of, like there was a massive debacle in 2021 and perhaps even before, calling Wizards of the Coast very racist because of some of the creatures, the systems, the backstories of various races that are in the game. And this was met with a lot of backlash in the tabletop gaming community, and you can certainly go look up a lot of the information having to do with that. But there was definitely pushback against the creation of Dungeons and Dragons and some of the races and how some of them maybe aren't accepting or maybe stereotyped or whatnot. So while D&D Beyond is going to officially be partnered with the main Dungeon Dragons and should bring really useful tools to help players with their gaming experience, a lot of people are looking at this like it might not be as positive of an acquisition as you might think on the surface. But we'll have to see. I'm curious to get an idea from all of you of what you think if you're a tabletop gamer and if you use D&D Beyond. How do you feel about Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro now having D&D Beyond as an in-house tool set instead of them being fairly independent? So let me know your thoughts in Discord. But with that, thank you so very much for being part of Patreon. I do these videos every week. If there are topics that you come across that you would like me to cover, let me know in Discord. I am fully willing to listen to ideas and go digging for more information about things. And with that, I hope all of you have a fantastic day. Don't forget to follow me on all social medias. I have Discord, I have Twitter, I have Twitch. And with that, I will see you guys next time.